Number one, the Demon Franklin. This is a character that originated in my dad's campaign. Oh man, this would have been eight. No, it can't be. No, it could have been about 8 years ago. We started a campaign with a couple of his friends of his from college and a few of my friends from kind of growing up in high school. And we found an iron flask in one of our first sessions. And when we opened the flask and we roll, I think we rolled to see what was on. I'm pretty sure we did, or it might have been pre-prepared. Either way, a demon burst out of the flask. I think it's definitely in the book. It's the one that has kind of like the dog face and the big crab claws. It's got like 4 arms, but this version, Franklin, had a wizard like fused to his chest, and that was like someone who had tried to get out of a deal or had a deal go bad with this. Was it a devil or a demon? Now I'm forgetting. But it was fused to his chest, and Franklin would draw power from this person who was just like, just this husk of a human in this demon. It was so cool. And it was fun enough getting introduced to Franklin. And my dad role played him really funny. He gave him like he's just really mean. He was just smart and mean to us. Anytime we talked to him, he'd try to make us feel bad or things like that. And it was hilarious. I really enjoyed it. But what ended up happening over the course of several weeks of play is we kept opening this flask to use Franklin as basically a get out of jail free card. And my dad started kind of paying attention to some of the things we were doing and the way we were interacting with Franklin, and basically set us up that we harmed Franklin directly, which my dad had cleverly like kind of let us know several sessions earlier. Like, I think we'd even asked Franklin, what would cause you to get out of the iron flask? What would cause you to be free? And in some amount of words, he basically said, if you directly harm me, if any of you harm me. And through some clever wordplay, basically, he got that to happen. And Franklin was set free in the world. And through some shenanigans, I think on Iron End, we managed to escape, of course, right? Of course, we didn't die. But Franklin was running amok in the world. And now he has made his way into my setting. And Franklin is now he was causing some problems for my players before. I've got some campaigns coming up that he's going to exist in. And the reason that that's one of my favorite RPG memories is not because I have necessarily like a specific encounter with Franklin that I thought was like really, really fun. More just that this character, I've spent so much time with them as a player. They've now made it into my world as a GM, which I think is really cool. And it's a character from my dad's campaign, so that's always fun. The second thing that is one of my favorite RPG memories was my Gen Con one shot. I've already told you about the time I went to Gen Con with my dad and brother a couple years ago. But I didn't tell you about a one-shot I ran there. It wasn't even during the day, like the actual event of Gen Con. I think we might have tried to sign up to run our own games, but we're too late with that. So I ended up instead just running a hotel game with a couple random guys that we'd seen down in the hotel like kitchen area the morning before, and agreed to do a session that night. And I was going to run it for them. And so I prepped this really crazy one-shot. There was this sea, and legend says any ship who tried to sail across it was basically pulled down by the anchors of this dead pirate captain. And how that happens is these ghostly anchors like shoot up out of the water, affix around the ship, and kind of like a kraken's tentacles crush it, pull it down into the water. That is where the session started. So all of these players were getting pulled down at the bottom of the ocean in their ship. It kind of shattered across the seafloor, and then they had to go in and fight whoever this pirate captain was, and his lair was made out of all of these wrecked ships that he had pulled down into the water. And what made it fun, what made this session and this one shot one of my best RPG memories, isn't that I feel like the encounters were particularly complex or even that like unique. It was kind of like there's sharks in a hallway, get through the hallway. You've got to swim across this ocean trench, but there's a cannon that can shoot you, like that kind of, from one of the shipwrecks. Just kind of that stuff. So that was fine. That was cool. It also wasn't the fact that it was at Gen Con with like some randos. I know a lot of people love to go to Gen Con for that kind of stuff. And that was cool. But what made it my favorite memory was just how much fun these random players had. How much fun they had with my style of GMing, which is really all about just making you and your character feel like the coolest possible person in as many moments as I can. When you're doing cool stuff, when you're having your successful roles, I love playing it up and describing how your character succeeds. Unless you do that. If the player likes to do that, great. But I find most of the time they don't. So I kind of take it upon myself to really build up the character's successes. So as an example, one of the characters in this group was some sort of star mage. They're like a sorcerer with constellations or something. That was the vibe they wanted. So anytime they were casting spells, I was describing how they would kind of like pinprick stars out of seemingly nothing in front of them as this nebula kind of formed. And then they would make this constellation as they threaded the light between them. And that would cause the constellation of the dragon to come alive and shoot fire. That might all be said just for a firebolt spell. That's the kind of stuff I like to do, and they loved it. And we even talked on Discord for a little while after. I'm terrible with Discord, so we haven't talked in a while, but we stayed in touch for a little bit, and it was just cool that some strangers had that much fun doing something that I had prepped and put a lot of work into for the evening. If you're a player listening to this right now, make sure you tell your GM if they do a good job, because it always feels good to hear that. Another best RPG memory was introducing the devil. And by the devil, I mean Strahd. I think a few of you have already heard my story about how I introduced Strahd, but it's just so damn cool. I wanted to share it again real fast for anybody who hasn't heard it. So I introduced Strahd for my, at one point I had 5 different Curse of Strahd campaigns going on Start Playing, but in one of my favorite ones, the way I introduced Strahd was the players all got brought into Barovia through the fog, right? That cursed fog brought them into Barovia, and they found themselves kind of running through this dead forest with the sound of wolves howling and kind of chasing them down. And that led to a fight with these wolves at the base of a tower, an old ruined watchtower, that a young boy, kind of on the cusp of adulthood, really, named Gavril, had led them to. He kind of found them in the woods and said, "Follow me," and led them there. And then he was helping with his bow to shoot the wolves and stuff. That was all very, very intentional. I wanted the players to get attached to Gavril. I bet you can see where this is going. They killed the wolves, went up to the top of the tower, and started making some cabbage, or they had I think they made rat cabbage was the stew that they had. And they just spent some time talking to Gavril and asking him questions about where they were. And of course, I played that up, getting to be this little boy telling them all of the horrible things that happen in Barovia and how they're all how they're doomed and how they're going to die here and how the devil's going to come get them. And as this conversation was happening, I had a knock at the door. And since they were on a tower, they all look over the edge and they see a tall figure cloaked in wolf's fur. They can't see his face, but he's just standing at the door, very tall, broad-shouldered. I'm sure you can see where this is going. And they, not really having any other choice, really, ended up having to open the door and met Strahd. And he was there with a basket of wine and pastries to be a good host. He was welcoming them into his home. And they kind of, again, not really having a choice. I mean, sure, they could have said, "No, you can't come in," but they were good players, and where's the fun in that? So they let Strahd kind of come up into their tower, and eventually, after a little bit of conversation, Gavril, the young boy, got really worked up and angry at Strahd and spit at him. And that's when all hell broke loose and a combat broke out. And the players knew exactly what I was doing basically when it started, because Strahd kind of looked down at Gavril as he was wiping the spit off his face and said, told him "Well, it looks like you need to be taught a lesson," something like that. And so Strahd just starts walking towards Gavril and begins to pick him up, and his claws are coming out, his big vampire teeth are coming out, and the players are doing everything they can to stop him. They're trying to cut his arms off, they're throwing spells at him, they're screaming. I think at one point they might have even managed to pry Gavril loose, but it was inevitable that Strahd killed Gavril right in front of them, and then left. He just kind of, what was his line? I think he looked down at Gavril, then he looked at the shattered bottles of wine, the red wine kind of spilling across the stone, and he said, "Enjoy the wine," and then flew away into the night sky. And that was how the characters met Strahd. And it was so cool. It is still one of the coolest, tight introductions to a campaign I feel like I've ever ran, and I loved it. It was really, really cool. Number 4, Costco Christmas trees. I think I've told you when I was working on all of this, and it was originally called Quest Chests. I was living in my parents' basement, working at Costco, pushing carts and all that good stuff to make enough money to pay to hire the artists and the bloggers and all those things I was trying to do. And every winter, when they have their Christmas trees, they bring a big trailer truck in, they park it next to the building, and then they just need somebody to stand inside that essentially freezer during the winter and hand out the trees as people buy them. And this was right around the time that Critical Role Campaign 2 was really, really popping off. And so for basically an entire winter, I got paid to stand. So I didn't even have to walk or push carts or anything. I got to stand in a freezer, a trailer truck, but I had my big like jacket and hoodie and every like gloves, all that on. And what was nice about that is it meant I could have one AirPod in and I could listen to all of Critical Role Campaign 2 for hours and get paid to do it. And it was kind of a tough time because I was living in my parents' basement trying to start a D&D, you know, creative business and it was tough. It was really hard. I was just out of college, and so it was a pretty not maybe not defining, but it was a very important time in my life, and D&D was there for a lot of it, which I just thought was cool. The death of is my fifth favorite D&D memory. Refers to the sound of cocking a gun, and that is because I was running a little. It didn't go very long. I think it was like 10 sessions or fewer. It was a campaign set in a sort of 40K-esque gothic apocalyptic setting, and the players were exploring this huge crashed ship. They were trying to navigate their way through it with an NPC they had met in the ruins. I don't even remember his name because we all came to know him as because he would always be cocking his gun. He had a rifle, and anytime they were going to do something or anytime he said anything, he would finish it by cocking the gun. So it'd be like, what do you think? Should we go down that hallway? He'd be like, oh, I think, I'm right behind you. And he would do that. And it started to drive the players crazy just how many times I would do that. I feel like I've already heard myself do it like 5 times just in the past minute. So that was funny. And then what it led to was even the best part is they were trying to get to the end of this hallway in this crashed ship. And there was, of course, oils and gases leaking everywhere. And in this specific hallway, I don't remember how it happened, but I somehow triggered or something sparked, this is a pun, sparked an explosion encounter where they had to flee down this hallway and get up this ladder as this explosion is kind of chasing them down the hallway from all the leaking pipes and stuff like that. So they're needing to make these checks to jump over the industrial pipes, slide over or under them, all that cool parkour stuff. And failed every single check he needed to make. He was tripping over everything. He was slipping in the oil, and all the characters basically made it there no problem. And I was kind of experimenting with something during these sessions where I was letting them use their inspiration. They could give it to another player to let them use it if they wanted. I don't allow that anymore. It ended up just being a little not busted, but I didn't like how it was a get out of jail free card for everybody to, at least once a session or twice a session, because you'd have your own inspiration and somebody else could give you theirs and somebody else. Anyways, you get what I'm saying. But back to my story. The players had made all of their saves and had inspiration left. So they were watching, running towards them, just covered in oil, getting like slamming his head into pipes and all those types of things. And we were all laughing so hard because we hated him, but the players didn't want him to die. And the explosion was kind of catching up. So they all started using their inspiration to try and help him get to them. And I let them roll it. Like my table always rolls in the open, and I even let them do it. Every single roll of all 3 of their inspirations failed. And so the last thing they saw of was him like limping, running up to the base of the ladder and looking up at them as they're kind of needing to climb out of the fireball that's approaching. And I think he just cocked his gun one last time as the explosion hit him. And it's just one of those NPCs that he was in our game for like less than 30 minutes. And I still think about him all the time. And now, last one for my best RPG memories was Small World world building. I think I've told you guys about this on a previous stream, but it was only once. And I just really want people to try this game because it is so fun. Actually, let me get a picture of it real quick. Hang on. This is Small World. I'm going to delete that in a sec, but at least you can see it now. So it's this really, really cool fantasy tabletop board game. It's not a role-playing game, but we played it as one. But the idea of the game is there's this map of a fantasy continent, and you have all these cards of these different civilizations, elves, Amazons, zombies, ratmen, and you are playing. It's kind of like Risk, where you're trying to occupy territories, and as you're doing so, like new groups of people are showing up to this land, and you're kind of trying to drive each other out with how Risk is exactly. I don't need to over explain that game, right? But I kind of started pushing us in this direction of, hey, we've got these, like, this is a fantasy game, and we're rolling these dice to see the outcomes of, do the elves push the dwarves out of the mountains? But why leave it at just a dice roll? Like, let's make a cool narrative explanation as to why did the elves come attack the dwarves? Was it part of an ancient grudge? Or did the dwarves have some like ancient fey beast trapped under the mountain and the elves wanted to free it? So that's why they went to war. And they were successful and they drove the dwarves out and freed this beast. But then that beast went on to destroy the rat folk civilization. And that's why they fell, because they were also at war with the giants, right? Like, that kind of stuff started to happen as we were playing this game. And it was so cool to create the history of of an RPG world that basically is what we were doing. But there was no D&D rule book out in front of us. There was no RPG rules to be found. It was just our own imagination. And by the end of it, we had this really cool world with a really rich, unique history that nobody could come up on their own. Nobody could come up with on their own. But because we were as part of a group, we came up with this really, really uniquely interwoven tapestry. That was awesome. Those are my best RPG memories. What do we think? I want to hear some of your favorite memories before we move on to the next section.